Hey, greetings dear viewer. Just in here petting my car. No, not really. Hey, don't worry, I'm going to get to pictures of the lovely watch and video as well. So, if you're not, I just wanted to do a little intro on this video. Those of you that have followed me for a long time may recognize this watch. And this is actually, yes, the same watch that I bought for my father for Father's Day many years ago. And camera technology has improved. Back then, I was using a crappy camera that was standard definition with a zoom lens. And now I have the ability to use HD cameras and give you guys better detail. So for those of you, this watch will not be new to you, but it'll be in much better detail. And for those of you that are new to my channel, I really appreciate you tuning in, and please enjoy the review. And as always, please share your feedback with me. I am open to criticism, and I am open to questions, comments, and concerns. So all that said, I'm going to get back to petting my car, and please enjoy the review. Thanks so much. And here it is. So here's the infamous Omega Seamaster. The Seamaster to Omega is the Submariner to Rolex, and the Monster to Seiko, right? Of course, I had to do my Seiko plug. But yeah, so this is the infamous Omega Seamaster. This is not the Bond watch, although it's quite close. The Bond watch, as Bond aficionados will know, featured the blue bezel. This is a black dial, black bezel. And as some of my fans may be dismayed, this watch is actually quartz as well. This uses the Omega 1538 movement, which is really a ETA movement. I believe it's based on the ETA 255 461 movement. Power reserve in terms of how long the battery should last, I believe, is about 42 months. And we're looking at about 6 joules in the movement. So now that we've gotten those boring movement specs out of the way, let's take a look at the watch. And you guys have seen this on my channel before, as I already mentioned. But again, as we've gone from SD to HD, I figured this would be an opportunity to really show you how incredible this watch looks in person. The watch is roughly about 41 millimeters, and it does feature a really nice bracelet. And the bracelet actually has the infamous Omega clasp, really nice little fold out, and it does have a diving extension roughly here. And this one's actually really easy to deploy. Just pop it, pull it, and there you go. And again, diver's extension, to those of you that are new to diving watches, gives you a little extra length in your bracelet so that you can wear the watch over a wetsuit. As again, when you're wearing a wetsuit, your wrists are going to be a little fatter than usual. So nice diver's extension. The bracelet has a nice little fluidity to it. It isn't as smooth as, say, a Breitling bracelet would be, but it is pretty nice. Now, one unfortunate aspect of this bracelet, as you should be able to tell now that I have these videos in HD, is those are push-out links. And at this price point, and if you've seen the original video when I posted this watch many years ago, I bought this watch for my father for Father's Day. I paid $2,200 for it at the time, and when you take that price point in consideration, it does seem that Omega was a tad cheap using push-out links. You know, as hopefully most of my fans are aware, screw-out links is really kind of the way to go. And if you have a screw-out link watch, you can just get a jeweler set for 10 bucks or so, and you can adjust the watch yourself. With screw-out links, you really kind of need a special tool, or you risk damaging the watch. It's something you can do at home. However, I don't recommend it unless you have a lot of skill measuring and adjusting bracelets, because it can be kind of annoying if you don't have a good tool, and you can actually damage the bracelet if you apply the pressure wrong. So go ahead and snap the diver's extension back in there. Nice, again, the fold over clasp. I really like these Omega clasps. The one thing you'll notice on here is that they do pick up scratches like nothing else. They're really hesitant or prone to getting scratched up. And as you can see on the bracelet, you get Omega Seamaster Professional. They've used this bracelet on quite a few watches. The Seamaster is not the only one. Speaking of Seamaster, there you can see the Seamaster itself. So there's their the beautiful little seahorse with the Omega symbol down below, and Seamaster as well. And this icon actually is raised. You can kind of get a sense of it here. It's really a pretty case back. I love the case back on this watch. You can just see how the way it reflects light too. It's beautiful the way it reflects light. And of course, it does feature solid end links as well. Not easy this thing to show on camera. Dial, it has the wave dial, as a lot of Seamasters do. And I'm trying to see if we can get to pick up on camera here. There you go. I just kind of said that like I'm from the Midwest. But you can see in this shot right here, there's that beautiful wave. The feature on these watches a lot of pictures don't really pick up on. It's unfortunate what a nice little texturing these dials tend to have on them. As with all dive watches, diver's bezel to keep track of your time underwater. As with all proper dive watches of the last, I'd say 20 or 30 years, it's unidirectional, i.e. you can only turn it one direction. If you haven't seen my other videos or aren't familiar, there's a reason for that, and the reason is you don't want to add time when you're underwater. So this is, when used as a diving tool, is used to keep track of time underwater. And so you rotate until you line up the triangle with the minute hand as such. And as time passes underwater, when the minute hand lines up with these additional marks, you can use them to keep track of how long you've been underwater. And if you're diving, especially if you're tank diving, you need to keep track of how much oxygen you have left, and also be aware you have to decompress back to the surface. So keeping track of how long you're underwater is extremely important. And the reason that this bezel is, of course, a unidirectional or one way is because if you were to turn it the other way, unfortunately, you would actually be taking away time, and you might trick yourself into thinking you've been underwater less time than you have. It turns with a nice feel to it. It's a little gritty, but it doesn't, but I say gritty, it doesn't, I don't mean that in a negative way. It doesn't feel cheap in terms of gritty, it just doesn't turn as fluid as I'd like it to. But it definitely feels precise, and there's a nice little kind of like coin edge indent around the dial. And it is pretty easy to grip, and actually I would rate this much easier to grip than like a Submariner dial. This thing I feel is easier to turn. Now, my Monster I think is easier to turn, but the Monster with these hollowed out bits in the case kind of has an advantage on that front. But for a standard case design, this is a pretty effective bezel, and it is 120 clicks as most diving watches are. So for every second you get 2 clicks. Now a lot of people always ask what this thing at the top does here. Nice little Omega logo on it. That's the helium escape valve. So if you watch the Bond movies, this actually activates the landmines that Bond places on the columns. But this doesn't press in like a lot of people would assume it does. It actually unscrews. And the reason that you do that is if you actually are in a dive, you can end up with helium will actually seep through the seals on the case and can actually get within the watch itself. And as you go back up to the surface and you're decompressing, you want to release this valve as it will let the helium escape from the watch. What can happen in theory if you don't have this mechanism is that the helium can actually pop the crystal out of the watch as you're decompressing and rendering your watch useless. So it's basically a watch saving feature. Not all dive watches use a helium escape valve. They found other ways of dealing with it. The Rolex Sea Dweller, for example, actually has like a pressure valve on the side of the case that will release in theory. But that's what that's for. It doesn't activate landmines. Sorry to disappoint you all. As with all dive watches, all the crowns are screw down. Well, all proper dive watches. So here, if we unscrew this, and you'll see the movement's hacking as well. Let's see how we can get it close. There's no visible seal on the crown. So I'm going to assume, I'm not going to take the watch apart, that the seal is either hidden in the crown itself or internal to the case. If any of you guys know the truth on that, feel free to leave me a comment below. But unlike a Rolex Submariner, you actually don't see the seal visible on the stem. It pulls out with a very good bit of celerity to it. Obviously it free spins because this being a quartz watch, there's no need to wind the movement. So first position it just spins. Second position you can change the date. And then third position hacking and you can set the time. And then you gotta screw it back in there. Kind of come up closer to the dial here. Sorry for the glare. This is a sapphire crystal, as should be expected for this price point. Unfortunately, as you can see with all the glare coming on the watch itself, it is not anti-reflective. And that's not to say the Rolex Submariner isn't anti-reflective either, nor is of course my Seiko Monster. But some watches such as Breitling and other watches will actually use an anti-reflective coating, and it actually kind of give the watch like a blue tint, and it perfects this kind of glare that you're getting here now because the watch is so shiny. There's the case side for you. It's a very nice slim case. The automatics I believe are slightly thicker. This case is extremely thin. And give you a sense of size, put it on my wrist next to the Seiko Monster. I believe the watch measures at 41 mil. And the Monster is slightly bigger, however, and if you look here, it actually looks like the Seamaster is larger. And the reason that is you can see the dial to bezel ratio is better, or I shouldn't say better, but it's differently proportioned than the Monster. So the Monster has a slightly smaller dial, but a much thicker bezel, as you can see here. Whereas the Seiko has actually a larger dial and a much thinner bezel. So you get really good visibility on the dial itself. And, you know, as with all dive watches, or all common dive watches, Submariners, Seamasters, Monsters, TAG Heuer Aqua Racers, you name it, they are all roughly around the 40 to 43 millimeter size, so they're all pretty much going to wear like this on the wrist. For those of you that are curious, I have a 7.5 millimeter wrist, or 7.5 millimeter, 7.5 inch wrist. But it is a very nice piece, and, you know, for those of you that aren't, you know, obsessed with having to have a mechanical watch, Quartz does of course have its advantages. It's of course going to be a more accurate timepiece than a mechanical equivalent in terms of timekeeping. The one issue with Quartz is they tend to have service life. So unlike a mechanical watch, you don't have to service it for oil and just general service mechanically. However, the seals do need to be fixed about every 5 years or so if you're going to be diving, as the rubber can rot, the gaskets can rot. But the other thing that with Quartz watches is that they have a battery leak, or if they have any sort of issue with the circuit board itself, it basically requires a complete replacement of the movement. And truth be told, this watch has not been particularly reliable. It's been good for about the last 4 years or so, but within the first year that my father had this watch after I gave it to him, they went back to Omega twice, both times because the movement stopped working. And both times, to my knowledge, actually required a complete replacement of the movement. Now, I will go on record and say that that's highly unlikely, I'm sure, for these watches in general. However, this watch is on its third movement, to my knowledge. So, just something to be aware of, probably just as a fluke. And I'll go ahead and show you the hands as well. There's those nice, beautiful Seamaster hands. The watch does have pretty decent luminescence. I apologize, I'm not near a dark space to kind of give you a sense of how well it glows, but they definitely have a nice, like almost like a light green glow to them when they light up in a dark space, and they definitely has really good visibility. So I'll leave it here. Very nice piece. I guess my only complaints for what it cost originally is, again, you have these push pins. As you also know, I tend to be a little bit stuck up about watches using in-house movements, and the fact that this not only has a quartz, but it uses an ETA quartz, for me would put this watch out of the running for something I would ever purchase. But if you're not stuck up like me, if you don't need in-house movements and you're not, you know, hung up on having a mechanical movement, this watch has a beautiful timeless design. It has overall very good fit and finish, and it should prove to be a reliable companion for at least a few decades, I would assume. Now on the flip side, it's never going to have the resale value of a mechanical piece. It's never going to have the collectability of a mechanical piece. And as Omega works on their own in-house movements now, and the watches have gotten, I'd say with Omega, quality has gotten better since this piece first came out. The new Seamaster Planet Oceans and their current line of Seamasters, especially the ones featuring in-house movements, I would say have better fit and finish on their cases, better bracelets, and they're just better pieces overall. But for what this watch is, and this watch now is about 7 years old, I believe, it still represents a beautiful timeless watch. And you know, if this is something you're interested in, I would highly recommend you picking one up. And for those of you wondering what the dial says, it says Seamaster Professional. List the depth rating, and then at 6 o'clock you'll see it says Swiss made. So as always, thank you so much for your support. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you thought it was sucked and that I bored you or gave you anonymous boring facts, go ahead and give me a thumbs down, but of course have the courage to tell me why in the comments below. I will take your feedback into consideration as always. And as always, thank you so much for your support. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and hope you're having yourself a very good day.